If someone had asked me to describe my marriage before the morning everything changed, I would have smiled without hesitation. I would have told them that my husband, Ethan, was the most dependable person I had ever known. He wasn't flashy or overly romantic, but he was steady. He remembered the little things, kept his promises, and somehow always knew when I needed a hug before I even said a word. For 12 years, we built a life that felt ordinary in the best possible way. We had 2 amazing children, a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood, and the kind of relationship that wasn't perfect but felt safe. We argued about whose turn it was to unload the dishwasher, laughed over burnt pancakes on Saturday mornings, and spent Friday nights watching old movies after the kids fell asleep. It wasn't the kind of marriage people posted about online. It was better than that. It was real. When our youngest daughter started kindergarten, Ethan and I found ourselves talking about the future in a different way. The exhausting years of diapers, sleepless nights, and daycare pickups were finally behind us. We loved being parents, but we also knew our family felt complete. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, we sat on the back porch with mugs of coffee, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. Ethan looked at me and smiled. "I think we're done." I laughed. "Done with what?" "Having kids." I leaned back in my chair. "I was wondering when you'd say it." We had talked about it before, but never seriously. This time felt different. It wasn't about giving something up. It was about recognizing that our family already felt whole. A few weeks later, Ethan scheduled a vasectomy consultation. He was nervous, even though he tried to hide it. "The internet has convinced me this is going to be terrible," he joked on the drive to the clinic. "You'll survive," I teased. "I expect unlimited sympathy afterward." "You'll get one day." "One day?" "If you're lucky." He laughed all the way into the waiting room. The procedure itself was quick, and after a weekend of resting with frozen peas and streaming action movies, he was back on his feet. Life slipped back into its familiar rhythm. The kids had soccer practice. Work deadlines piled up. Our weekends filled with birthday parties, grocery shopping, and family dinners. If anyone had asked me then whether I believed something extraordinary was about to happen, I would have said no without thinking twice. Nothing about our lives suggested a storm was coming. About 2 months later, I started feeling unusually tired. At first, I blamed work. The end of the quarter was always hectic, and I'd been staying late almost every evening. Then came the nausea. It wasn't constant, just enough to make breakfast seem unappealing. "You okay?" Ethan asked one morning as I pushed my toast away. "I think I picked up a stomach bug." "You should slow down." "I will." But the strange feeling didn't disappear. Days turned into a week. Coffee suddenly smelled awful. Foods I normally loved made me feel sick. One afternoon, while standing in line at the pharmacy to buy cold medicine, my eyes drifted toward a shelf of pregnancy tests. I almost laughed. "That's impossible," I muttered to myself. Still, a tiny voice inside my head whispered, "What if?" Mostly to prove that voice wrong, I grabbed a test and tossed it into my basket. When I got home, I shoved the small box into the bathroom cabinet without mentioning it to Ethan. Later that evening, after the kids were asleep, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the package. "This is ridiculous," I whispered. I followed the instructions, set the test on the bathroom counter, and forced myself not to stare at it. The waiting felt endless. To distract myself, I brushed my hair, folded towels, and reorganized a drawer that didn't need reorganizing. Finally, I looked down. 2 pink lines. For a moment, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. No. I picked up the test, convinced I had misread it. 2 unmistakable lines stared back at me. This has to be wrong. My hands started shaking. I grabbed my phone and searched for false positives. Rare. Possible. Uncommon. None of the explanations made sense. The next morning, I bought 2 more tests from a different pharmacy. Both were positive. By the afternoon, my doctor ordered blood work. 24 hours later, she called. "Congratulations, Sarah." My heart sank instead of soaring. "You're pregnant." I thanked her automatically before ending the call. I sat in my parked car outside the clinic, staring through the windshield. Pregnant. After Ethan's vasectomy. It didn't seem possible. Not because I doubted my own honesty. Because I knew exactly what this news would sound like. That evening, Ethan walked through the front door carrying a pizza for dinner. "You look pale," he said immediately. "Everything okay?" I swallowed hard. "We need to talk." His smile faded. "What happened?" I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded lab report. "I went to the doctor today." He took the paper, scanning it casually at first. Then his expression froze. He looked up at me. Then back at the report. Then at me again. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavier than anything we had ever experienced. Finally, he whispered 4 words that neither of us would ever forget. Ethan's words echoed through the kitchen long after the silence settled between us. "That's not possible." He wasn't yelling. He wasn't accusing me. Not yet. He simply stood there holding the lab report as if it belonged to someone else. I could see his mind trying to make sense of something that didn't seem to have an explanation. "I know how it sounds," I whispered. He looked up. "Do you?" His voice was calm, but there was something unfamiliar behind it. Fear. Confusion. Disbelief. "I don't understand it either," I said. "I took 3 home tests before I even went to the doctor. I thought they had to be wrong." He slowly placed the paper on the kitchen counter. "I had the surgery." "I know. The doctor said it worked." "I know." "Then explain this." "I can't." Those 2 words hung in the air like a wall between us. For 12 years, Ethan had trusted me without question. Now I watched uncertainty replace certainty right in front of my eyes. That night, neither of us slept. I lay awake listening to the sound of him turning over on the other side of the bed every few minutes. Usually, when one of us couldn't sleep, we'd talk. Not this time. The silence heard more than any argument could have. The next morning, Ethan left for work without kissing me goodbye. It was such a small thing. But after 12 years together, I noticed it immediately. He simply grabbed his keys. "I'll be late." Then he walked out the front door. I stood in the hallway long after he had driven away. For the first time in our marriage, our house didn't feel like home. Over the next few days, things became even stranger. Ethan wasn't cruel. He wasn't screaming or throwing accusations. Instead, he became distant. Every conversation was short. Every smile disappeared. He answered questions with 1-word responses. At dinner, he focused on the children instead of me. When I reached for his hand one evening, he quietly moved it away to pick up his glass of water. That simple movement broke something inside me. One Friday afternoon, I walked into our bedroom and found him sitting on the edge of the bed staring at his phone. "What are you reading?" I asked. He quickly locked the screen. "Nothing." I sat beside him. "Ethan." He didn't look at me. "Just tell me the truth." "I have." "No. This time. I am telling the truth." His jaw tightened. "I had a vasectomy 2 months ago." "I know." "You became pregnant." "I know." There are only 2 explanations. I already knew where this conversation was going. My chest tightened. "I didn't cheat on you." His eyes finally met mine. "Then tell me how this happened." "I wish I could." He stood up and walked toward the window. "I've replayed the last few months 1,000 times. So have I. I keep hoping I'll find another answer. So do I. But every answer leads to the same place. I felt tears forming. Ethan. He turned around. Did you sleep with someone else? The words hit me like a slap. I couldn't believe the man who had known me for over a decade was asking me that question. No. His expression didn't change. I have never been unfaithful to you. Not once. Not ever. He closed his eyes for a moment. I want to believe you. Then believe me. I don't know how. Those 6 words hurt more than anything else. Because I realized he wasn't calling me a liar. He simply couldn't reconcile what he believed with what was happening. The following week became unbearable. The children could tell something was wrong. Our 8-year-old son asked one night, "Are you and Dad mad at each other?" I forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. We're just tired." He accepted the answer. Children often do. But I hated lying to him. A few days later, Ethan asked if we could talk after dinner. I already knew the conversation wasn't going to be good. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table after the kids had gone to bed. He took a long breath. I spoke to my urologist. I looked up. What did he say? He said the procedure was successful. Did he do any follow-up testing? Ethan hesitated. I never went back. I frowned. What do you mean? He told me to come back in a few months for a semen analysis. I got busy. I blinked. You never confirmed the vasectomy had actually worked? He rubbed his forehead. He said the chances were extremely small. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he shook his head. It doesn't matter. Why? Because even if there was a tiny chance. He looked directly into my eyes. I can't stop thinking about the other possibility. I felt my heart breaking. The man I loved was trapped between trust and doubt. And doubt was slowly winning. Word spread through our family sooner than I expected. I hadn't told anyone. Neither had Ethan. But secrets have a way of escaping. My mother called first. Is everything okay? I tried to sound normal. Why wouldn't it be? I talked to Ethan's mother. My stomach dropped. What did she say? Only that you're both going through something difficult. Within days, everyone seemed to know. No one asked me directly whether I had been unfaithful. They didn't have to. Their cautious voices. Their awkward pauses. The sympathetic looks. They said enough. At a family barbecue, Ethan's older brother pulled him aside for nearly 20 minutes. When they returned, neither of them looked at me. His sister barely spoke to me the entire afternoon. I suddenly felt like a stranger among people who had once called me family. Even some of my closest friends didn't know what to believe. Lily came over one evening with takeout and sat beside me on the couch. I believe you, she said quietly. The words immediately brought tears to my eyes. You do? Yes. Even though none of this makes sense. She nodded. Exactly. If you were lying, your story would probably make more sense. I laughed through my tears. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. But outside my living room, life continued falling apart. One afternoon, I came home early from work. The house was unusually quiet. I found Ethan in the home office surrounded by paperwork. He looked up as I walked in. I met with a lawyer today. For a second, I couldn't breathe. A lawyer? He nodded. I've filed for divorce. The room seemed to spin. Ethan. I'm sorry. No. You don't get to say you're sorry. You don't even know the truth. I know enough. You don't. I have to protect myself. What about protecting us? His eyes filled with tears.
I don't know how anymore.
I slowly sat down across from him.
What happens now?
He stared at the divorce papers for a long moment.
When the baby is born.
His voice cracked.
I want a DNA test.
The words shattered the last piece of hope I had been holding on to. For 12 years, Ethan had trusted me with his heart. Now he wanted science to decide whether I had betrayed him. As I looked at the man I still loved more than anyone in the world, I realized our marriage wasn't ending because of proven betrayal. It was ending because doubt had become stronger than trust. And I had no idea whether either of us would ever find a way back. The divorce papers sat untouched on the kitchen table for 3 days.
Every time I walked past them, my chest tightened. Not because I didn't understand why Ethan had filed. I did. If our positions had been reversed, I couldn't honestly say I would have reacted any differently. That realization didn't make the pain any easier to carry. It only made it lonelier.
A week later, I met my obstetrician for another prenatal appointment. She reviewed my blood work before looking up at me.
How are you holding up?
The question caught me off guard.
I've been better. She nodded knowingly. Your blood pressure is higher than I'd like. I forced a smile. I'm under a little stress. A little? I laughed quietly. My husband filed for divorce because I'm pregnant after his vasectomy.
For a moment, she simply stared at me.
Then she asked a question I hadn't expected. Did your husband complete his follow-up fertility test? I blinked. I don't know. A vasectomy isn't considered confirmed until a semen analysis shows there are no sperm remaining. I frowned. So pregnancy is possible? It's uncommon. Very uncommon. But uncommon isn't the same as impossible. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Hope. Not because I suddenly had proof, but because someone in the medical field wasn't treating my pregnancy like evidence of betrayal. She was treating it like a medical question that deserved an answer. When I got home, I searched everything I could find about vasectomies. Medical journals, hospital websites, professional guidelines. I avoided forums and opinion pieces. I wanted facts. Again and again, I read the same thing.
Patients are advised to continue using contraception until a follow-up semen analysis confirms the procedure was successful. Some men remain fertile for weeks. Rarely, fertility can persist longer. In even rarer cases, the reproductive tract can reconnect naturally. The chances were extremely small. But they existed. I printed several medical articles and placed them neatly into a folder. Not because I wanted to win an argument. Because I wanted Ethan to know there was another explanation. The following evening, I knocked on the apartment door where he had been staying since moving out. He opened it after a long pause. What are you doing here? I brought something. He looked at the folder in my hands. I'm not interested. Please. It'll only take a minute. He hesitated before stepping aside. The apartment felt empty. Boxes were still stacked against the walls. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a waiting room. I placed the folder on the coffee table. My doctor asked whether you ever had your follow-up test. He looked away. I told you. I got busy. I nodded. I know. But Ethan. I gently pushed the folder toward him. Read these. He didn't touch it. They're medical studies. They explain that pregnancies can happen after a vasectomy. They're rare. But real. He crossed his arms. Sarah. I've already spent hours reading about this. So have I. I know the odds. I do too. Then you know how unlikely it is. Yes. But unlikely doesn't mean impossible. He looked exhausted. I want to believe that.
I really do. But every time I close my eyes. He stopped speaking. What? I hear one sentence. What sentence? My wife is pregnant after I had a vasectomy. He looked down.
My brain can't make those words fit together.
I understood. Facts don't always overcome emotion.
Especially when trust has already been shaken.
Before leaving, I quietly said, "When our baby is born, the DNA test will tell us the truth." He nodded without looking at me. I know. The months passed slowly.
My pregnancy continued.
The divorce proceedings moved forward.
We communicated mostly through lawyers and short text messages about finances.
The warmth that had once filled every conversation disappeared completely. Some days I wondered whether we would ever speak normally again. Despite everything, Ethan never missed an ultrasound appointment. He never stood beside me. He always sat across the room. Silent. Watching. When our daughter kicked for the first time during one appointment, the technician smiled.
There she goes.
Instinctively, I looked toward Ethan.
For just a second, the old smile returned to his face. Then he remembered why we were there. The smile disappeared. One afternoon, after another routine checkup, my doctor stopped me before I left.
I requested copies of your husband's surgical records. I frowned. You can do that?
With his written consent.
He agreed.
I felt surprised.
What did you find?
She adjusted her glasses.
The procedure itself appears routine.
But there's no record of the follow-up analysis ever being completed.
I nodded. I know.
She looked at me carefully.
I can't predict what the DNA test will show. No one can. But medically speaking. She paused. Your situation isn't impossible.
Those words stayed with me for days.
Not impossible.
I repeated them silently whenever doubt threatened to overwhelm me. Meanwhile, Ethan seemed to be fighting a battle inside himself.
One evening, he called unexpectedly. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he asked, "How's the baby?" I smiled despite everything. "Healthy. I'm glad." Another silence. I still don't know what to think. I know. I hate feeling like this. So do I.
His voice sounded tired.
I don't want to hate you. I know. I just. He stopped. What? I need the truth.
I looked out the window as rain tapped softly against the glass.
So do I.
As my due date approached, it felt as though our entire future depended on a single moment.
Friends stopped asking questions.
Family members avoided discussing the pregnancy altogether.
Everyone seemed to be waiting for the same thing. The birth. The DNA test. The answer.
Some believed the test would expose a terrible betrayal. Others quietly hoped it would prove a medical miracle.
Only one thing was certain. When those results finally arrived, nothing in our lives would ever be the same again. The contractions started just after 2 o'clock in the morning.
At first, I convinced myself they were false labor. I'd been having irregular contractions for days, and I didn't want to wake anyone unless I was sure. But by 3:30, they were stronger. Closer together. I picked up my phone and stared at Ethan's name for almost a full minute. We were separated. The divorce was moving forward. He had made it painfully clear that he didn't know whether he could trust me. Still, he was the father of the 2 children we had raised together. And if there was even the smallest chance this baby was his, he deserved to know.
My hands trembled as I pressed call.
He answered after the second ring.
"Sarah? I think it's time."
There was a brief silence.
"I'll be there." Nothing more. No questions. No hesitation. 40 minutes later, he was pulling into my driveway.
The ride to the hospital felt strangely familiar. For years, we had driven together everywhere.
School events, family vacations, doctor's appointments.
Now we sat in complete silence, separated by more than just the center console.
Every few minutes, another contraction forced me to grip the seat.
Without saying a word, Ethan turned the radio off. When another contraction hit harder than the last, he quietly reached over and handed me a bottle of water.
For just a second, it felt like the old Ethan was still there. The man who always knew what I needed before I asked. The hospital staff admitted me quickly.
Everything became a blur of monitors, paperwork, nurses, and bright lights.
Hours passed. Pain came in waves. Between contractions, I occasionally caught Ethan standing near the window.
He wasn't close enough to hold my hand. But he never left the room.
Late that afternoon, our daughter entered the world.
The moment I heard her cry, tears streamed down my face.
She was perfect. Tiny fingers. Dark hair. Strong lungs.
The nurse gently placed her in my arms. For a moment, every argument, every accusation, every sleepless night disappeared.
She wasn't a scandal. She wasn't evidence. She was simply a little girl entering the world. I looked toward Ethan. His eyes never left the baby. He looked overwhelmed.
Afraid to step closer.
Afraid to step away.
The nurse smiled.
"Dad?"
He hesitated before walking over.
"Would you like to hold her?" He looked at me. I nodded.
Carefully, he lifted our daughter into his arms. She immediately wrapped her tiny hand around one of his fingers. His face changed instantly. Tears filled his eyes. "She's beautiful," he whispered.
I smiled. "She is."
For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then reality returned.
The DNA test.
The nurse explained the process before collecting the required samples.
Everything felt strangely clinical. One simple procedure. One laboratory report. One answer capable of changing every life in the room. The waiting was unbearable.
3 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. My mother helped me settle in at home while Ethan returned to work.
We barely spoke. There was nothing left to say until the results arrived. 5 days later, my phone rang. The laboratory.
My heartbeat became so loud I could barely hear the woman speaking.
"Mrs. Carter?" "Yes. The DNA analysis has been completed."
I closed my eyes.
"And?"
"There is a 99.99% probability that Ethan Carter is the biological father of your daughter."
For a moment, the world seemed to stop. I thanked her automatically before ending the call. Then I cried. Not because I had been proven right. Because the truth had finally arrived. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Ethan.
His voice was barely audible.
"I got the report."
I remained silent.
"So did I." Another long pause. "I'm coming over."
20 minutes later, he stood on my front porch. The moment I opened the door, he looked at me with eyes full of disbelief.
I was wrong. I didn't answer. I was completely wrong.
He covered his face with both hands.
"I accused you. I doubted you. I let everyone doubt you."
His voice cracked. "And you were telling the truth the whole time." Tears rolled down his face.
"I don't know how to apologize for that."
I quietly stepped aside so he could come in.
Our daughter was sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. Ethan walked over and looked down at her.
Then he whispered something I never expected to hear.
"I'm sorry." Not to me. To her. "I'm sorry your first story began with my fear instead of my faith."
The next morning, Ethan called his urologist and demanded a complete evaluation. A week later, we sat together in the doctor's office. The physician reviewed several test results before speaking.
I understand why you're confused. Ethan leaned forward. I did everything right.
You completed the surgery, the doctor replied.
But you never completed the follow-up semen analysis. I know. The follow-up isn't optional. It's how we confirm the procedure has actually become effective. The doctor opened Ethan's medical file.
Your recent testing shows sperm are present.
Ethan frowned. How?
There are two likely explanations. The first is that viable sperm remained after the procedure because effectiveness was never confirmed.
The second, although much rarer, is spontaneous recanalization. I looked at the doctor. What does that mean?
He folded his hands together. Very occasionally, the body naturally reconnects the tubes that were divided during a vasectomy.
It's uncommon. But it's a recognized medical complication.
Ethan stared at the floor.
So, this really happened?
Yes.
The doctor nodded.
It appears your vasectomy failed. The room became completely silent.
Months of anger. Weeks of legal paperwork. Countless accusations.
Every painful conversation suddenly looked different. As we walked toward the parking lot, Ethan stopped beside the car. I destroyed our marriage because I believed something impossible had happened.
I looked at him quietly.
You believed fear before you believed me.
He lowered his head. I know.
I'll regret that for the rest of my life. He looked at me with tears in his eyes.
I can't change what I said.
I can't erase what I put you through.
But if there's any chance...
His voice trembled. I'll spend the rest of my life earning back the trust one threw away. For the first time in months, I didn't see the angry husband who had filed for divorce. I saw a broken man finally facing the consequences of his own assumptions.
And I realized that sometimes the hardest truth isn't discovering you were wrong.
It's accepting how much damage you caused while believing you were right. The weeks after the DNA results felt strangely quiet.
Not because everything had been fixed. Quite the opposite.
The truth had finally come out, but the damage it had caused was still sitting between us like an invisible wall.
Ethan came by the house every evening after work to spend time with our newborn daughter and our two older children. He never missed a visit.
He changed diapers without being asked, helped with homework, made dinner when I was too exhausted to cook, and tucked the kids into bed just like he always had. But when the children were asleep, he never assumed he had the right to stay. He would quietly grab his jacket, thank me for letting him visit, and head toward the front door. One evening, just before leaving, he stopped.
I canceled the divorce hearing. I looked up from folding baby clothes. You did? He nodded. I know that doesn't fix anything. It doesn't.
I wasn't trying to pretend it does. He gave me a small, sad smile.
I just couldn't keep moving forward with something that was built on a lie.
I appreciated his honesty, but my heart wasn't ready to celebrate.
The paperwork could be cancelled in a single phone call. Broken trust couldn't. Days turned into weeks.
Weeks slowly became months. For the first time since everything had happened, Ethan stopped trying to convince me to forgive him. Instead, he simply showed up.
Every single day.
If one of the kids had a soccer game, he was there. If I needed groceries, they appeared on the porch before I even asked. When the baby cried through the night and he had work the next morning, he still came over before sunrise just to let me sleep for an extra hour.
He wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't trying to erase the past.
He was trying to become the man he should have been when I first told him I was pregnant. One Saturday afternoon, Lily stopped by while Ethan was helping our son build a treehouse in the backyard. She watched through the kitchen window for a moment before turning to me.
He hasn't given up.
I smiled faintly.
No. Have you? I looked outside.
Ethan was laughing as our son proudly held up a crooked wooden board that definitely wasn't straight. For a second, it looked like the life we used to have. I don't know, I admitted. I still love him. But every time I remember the way he looked at me. I stopped. Lily nodded. I know. He didn't just doubt you. He doubted your character. Exactly. That's the part one can't forget. A few days later, Ethan asked if we could take a walk after the kids were asleep. We ended up at the small park where we used to bring the children every Sunday. The swings moved gently in the evening breeze. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. I've been seeing a therapist. I looked at him. You have? He nodded. I needed to understand why I jumped to the worst possible conclusion. What did you learn? He let out a slow breath. That fear speaks louder than trust when you stop communicating. He looked down at his hands. I wasn't just scared of losing my marriage. I was terrified of looking foolish. I let my pride make decisions my heart should have questioned. I stayed quiet. My therapist asked me one question that I couldn't answer. What was it? He asked, if Sarah had accused you of cheating because of one impossible situation, how would you have felt? His voice cracked. I realized I would have been devastated. And that's exactly what I did to you. For the first time since everything had happened, I saw him cry without trying to hide it. Not because he wanted sympathy. Because he finally understood the weight of his actions. I've apologized 100 times, he whispered. But I know apologies aren't enough. No. They aren't. What do you need from me? I thought about the question for a long time. Finally, I answered honestly. I need time. He nodded immediately. No pressure. No expectations. I'll wait. And he did. Months passed. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. The children laughed again. The house felt lighter. The baby grew from a sleepy newborn into a smiling little girl who reached for her father every time he walked through the door. Watching them together healed a part of me I didn't even know was broken. One evening, while cleaning out a kitchen drawer, I found the original lab report confirming my pregnancy. The same piece of paper that had started the worst chapter of our lives. I stared at it for a long time before quietly tearing it in half. Then again. And again. Not because I wanted to erase the memory. Because I no longer wanted to let that moment define our future. A year after our daughter was born, Ethan asked me to meet him at the small lake where he had proposed years earlier. When I arrived, there were no flowers. No grand gestures. No expensive gifts. Just Ethan standing by the water with nervous eyes. I've spent the last year trying to earn something I gave away in one moment, he said softly. I don't know if I'll ever deserve it. I walked closer. But I needed you to know something. He reached into his jacket. Not for a ring, but for a folded piece of paper. It was the letter he had written months earlier but never had the courage to give me. He handed it to me. Inside, he had written about every mistake he had made. Not excuses. Not explanations. Just ownership. One sentence stood out more than the others. The greatest failure wasn't that my vasectomy failed. The greatest failure was that my trust failed before I gave the woman I loved the chance to be heard. I folded the letter carefully. I can't promise we'll never struggle again, I said. He nodded. I know. I can't promise life won't surprise us. I know. But I can promise one thing. He looked at me hopefully. If we ever face something impossible again. I reached for his hand. We face it together. His eyes filled with tears. So, does this mean? I smiled. It means we're starting over. Not from where we left off. From where we've grown. He wrapped his arms around me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the embrace didn't feel heavy with guilt or fear. It felt like hope. As we stood by the lake, our children ran ahead, laughing while the baby clapped from her stroller, completely unaware of everything that had brought us to this moment.
I realized something then.
People often believe love is what holds a marriage together.
Love matters. But love alone isn't enough. Trust is what carries love through impossible moments. Communication is what protects it. Humility is what repairs it.
And forgiveness, when freely given, becomes the bridge that allows two imperfect people to find each other again. Looking back, the pregnancy wasn't what nearly destroyed our family.
Assumptions did. Fear did. Silence did. The miracle wasn't simply that our daughter was born.
The miracle was that we learned the truth before bitterness became permanent.
Sometimes life gives us questions with impossible answers.
In those moments, the strongest relationships aren't the ones that never face doubt.
They're the ones that choose understanding before judgment.
And every time I look at our daughter now, I don't remember the accusations or the heartbreak. I remember the lesson she unknowingly taught us before she even took her first breath. The truth always deserves a chance to be heard.